A fair warning up front before we get started. This review for Ori and the Blind Forest will fully spoil the story of the game, but more importantly, the gameplay itself. This review is not intended to sell this game to you. I'm not a critic that's motivated by any outside funding. This is just my appraisal of the game in respect to what works and what doesn't. For the record, Ori and the Blind Forest is my game of the year of 2015. In a year with a lot of strong contenders like Bloodborne, The Witcher 3, Yoshi's Woolly World, Xenoblade Chronicles X, what else came out this year? Some people liked Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, Fallout 4, if you could get it working, Destiny? I think that had an expansion. The point is that a lot of games came out this year that some would say were deserving of the Game of the Year spot, but for me at least, Ori and the Blind Forest was the game that stood out to me the most. And I wholeheartedly recommend this game to you, regardless of the types of games that you like to play. And hopefully this video will shed some light on why I think it is so good. So with all that out of the way, let's pick a save file and get started. The introduction of Ori and the Blind Forest is a very, very strong one that grabs your attention as quickly as possible. Right off the bat, the visuals are stunning and everything is wonderfully animated. The Spirit Tree's narration is just vague enough to let you know that this is going to be a pretty huge yet perilous journey. Finally, the soundtrack sets a very mystical tone that fits perfectly with the natural fantasy setting of a magical forest. The prologue works as a sort of promptless tutorial in a way. I know a lot of people sort of shy away when they hear the word tutorial, but when you look at it, there are no buttons on the screen. But at many points, you're expected to walk from left to right, right to left, and even having to jump up small ledges to progress. It teaches you the controls. It may be simple, especially since it's just the controls of a 2D platformer, but it's still effective, and it's scripted enough to continually build the characters and the world as it goes. Even though the story will not be a major topic covered in this review, I do think it's good to point out just how strong the emotion is in this prologue. Everything from the contrasting colors and the changing environment, to the character animations, to the soundtrack, keeps on piling layer upon layer of emotional buildup. Some would say that it's picking at low-hanging fruit to set up such a cute foster-parent relationship, and showing us some of their happiest moments before basically starving Ori's foster mother to death, and then sending Ori himself into a wasteland to die himself, but hey, it worked. I mean, I cried. And that was probably the point, you know? To set up some type of emotional attachment to the characters, and by extension, the world, before tasking the player with fixing everything. You see, a lot of elements had to come together very, very well to make this prologue the gut punch that it was, but they really, really laid it on thick with the animation and soundtrack. Because without any real dialogue, we see how much care and sacrifice went into this family before it was torn apart by the decay of the forest. All the while, the presentation and tone of the soundtrack shifts from a happy and upbeat tune to a slow, somber piano melody that hits you right in them honey nut felios. In the end, the prologue was very light on interaction, but that was a conscious decision to just hone in on the art and sound for a while as a temporary focal point rather than as a supplement for the actual gameplay. And just as it should, it's after Ori is resurrected, alone and with the Spirit Tree looming on the horizon, that we begin our journey. After she wakes up, Ori's just supposed to explore around a little bit. Immediately, we are given the same controls that we just had, running and jumping. Pretty simple, but very responsive. Ori's basic movement speed is fast, and Ori has just enough inertia to him to make his actions feel weighty and satisfying without being overly committal. The same goes with the jump arcs. Ori's jump arcs are much more horizontal than they are vertical. Ori only needs to fall down a pit to progress, and in so doing finds his way to the first energy cell, and with it we get Soul Link, an ability that doesn't really make sense until you see it in action. We go forward, and we quickly realize that we are not here alone. Suddenly, we are presented with danger, the first enemy we see, and we don't have any way to defend ourselves. Most enemies in Ori and the Blind Forest are really aggressive, attacking as often as possible. Basically, if they can see you, they'll try to kill you, so you're on the defensive quite often, especially in the early game. I really like this interaction. Straight away, you're trapped on the opposite side of a height advantage, with a very fast armored boar that's just trying to charge you down and push your shit in. There's a cracked pillar behind you that you can't break down because you aren't strong enough yet. Basically, it's a puzzle. You have your enemy, that enemy's aggression, and the environment, as well as your own abilities as the puzzle pieces. It's just up to you to put them together, and then boom. You're safe, and the path is open again. It's a really cool way to also subsidize your reduced ability count as well. Since it is so early in the game and you're lacking most of your abilities, you need to rely on other things to do what you're not able to, just like with this barrier here. You can't break it down yet, so you gotta use the boar to do it for you. If the player were to die for whatever reason here, then this will be their first interaction with Soul Link. Instead of you respawning all the way back at where you start the game, you spawn where you placed the Soul Link, and time has reset to when you placed the Soul Link. Basically, it's a save state with a couple of restrictions on it to make it balanced. I really like Soul Link in Ori. It's a very simple system, but it does a lot to encourage creativity, it reduces frustration, and all the while it gives you a greater sense of control. Since you are the one to choose when you place your Soul Link, you basically decide the start of your iteration cycle. Iteration cycles are something that developers have to think about a lot in game development. Take Dark Souls, for example. If you were to rest at the bonfire in the Undead Burg and traveled to fight the Taurus Demon, and you killed every hollow on the way there, but died fighting the Taurus Demon, then you would respawn back at the bonfire, and you would have to redo everything that you already did successfully your first time around before you got to try again at killing Taurus Demon. Basically, in some games, you can wind up redoing a lot of irrelevant challenges to get back to something that actually challenges you. But in Ori, it gives the choice of where you place the start of your iteration cycle. Imagine if instead of starting back at the bonfire, you just respawn directly outside of Taurus's fog gate. Since you have a surefire starting point after a failure, you can start to mess around with your challenges and try a lot of different approaches to problems. This is especially true since you don't have to really mess with a bunch of stupid stuff to get back to the interesting bits. This also removes a lot of unnecessary anger, since you don't feel an excessive sting from failure. It doesn't make the actual challenges any less challenging, it just doesn't put you on tilt for messing up. But all of this hinges on you as a player. Outside of a handful of checkpoints after major story moments, you dictate when you want to make a save. You also have to intelligently place your Soul Links. You can't just spam them in the early game, since placing Soul Links relies on your energy pool. Because of this, you need to be observant of your surroundings to see what could turn into a tough area. So, depending on when you place your Soul Link, if you progress far enough but fail, you can have to redo a lot of stuff. So, it could reduce your iteration cycle below a normal average, or it could increase it substantially. It's this subtle metagame, and it exists entirely with your input as the player. After we move past the wall in our first enemy encounter without wild Pokemon, we find Sign, Ori's primary damage tool. Sign does a lot of things in Ori. Mostly, she just tells you about the world and what to do next. She also rhymes, I guess? Sign is also your primary combat homie, helping you do sick drive-bys in the blind forest. Sign controls independent from Ori, so you can run and jump while Sign can shoot stuff. Effectively, it increases your maximum APM. Unfortunately, for everything that you're capable of with Sign, it isn't exactly a fun tool to use. Even though it may do some decent damage in the early game, it sort of drops off as the game goes on, unless of course you specialize in combat, which I'll cover in a bit. This means that fights can get very monotonous at times, where things take very long to die, and it interrupts the flow of your movement. It also doesn't help that, taken on its own, Spirit Flame lacks a lot of strong impact. The sound effect of Spirit Flame is a pew. A literal, audible pew. It's accompanied by a bright spark that seems to just happen to enemies. They don't really seem to notice it, and there's no real feeling of tension and release that characterizes really satisfying moves. As I said before, enemies don't really care when they get hit by Spirit Flame. They just sort of go about doing what they always do. They may flinch a little bit, but there's no hit stun. That is, of course, until their health bar is depleted, and they either explode or they fly off, like they just got hit by a freight truck. It's a little weird is my point, and it does a very bad job of deciding whether or not Sign is shooting paper balls or UPS vans at my opponents. Now, combine the bad scaling of the damage per hit with a sort of meh fire rate on top of the bad animation and sound, and it just results in a combat mechanic that I'd rather ignore for more enjoyable alternatives. It also sucks that the active puzzle solving that characterized the first enemy encounter isn't an approach that the whole game takes. Outside of a couple of interactions, enemy placement and design is a bit random, and it's also a little bit of a letdown. Enemies in Ori come in all shapes and sizes. Some try to rush you down to deal damage, others shoot spikes at you. Some are balls of energy that shoot laser beams, others fly, and some are pregnant. Lots of variety and lots of diversity to play with during your adventure. But almost all of them are governed by the same core AI principles. If Ori is within a certain proximity, they'll do their special attack. And then they'll wait, or scoot around a little bit, and then they'll attack again. Rinse and repeat until either you die, they die, or you run away from them. Part of me feels like this is a good thing, since they're so consistently aggressive, it makes them seem like wild animals that are just actively trying to kill you. But at other times, it gets really annoying, like, I don't know, fucking chill, dude. These enemies would have benefited greatly by more defensive design, or being used as puzzles more often, or, I don't know, just give them an Adderall prescription, or, I don't know, just don't place a shit ton of them really close together. This is not a Photoshop. There are that many blobs on screen, and they can all suck my balls. My problem really hinges on the fact that since you're incentivized to engage enemies through the level design, or hell, just for the XP that they drop, you have to fight them at length, and that's never really any fun. On the alternative, if you used other abilities like Bash to just avoid them, then you miss the encounter entirely. But Bash does not improve the combat between Ori and the enemies, it just removes it. The most fun to be had with the enemies is to use them like boost pads or as puzzle pieces to get through the environment in stylish ways. But the XP system runs counter to that, encouraging you to slow down and fight them. After some time spent exploring around a little bit and fighting some enemies, we reach our first platforming ability, Wall Jump. Wall jump is pretty common in most platforming games, since it can help justify having more cramped environments for you to play in, effectively transforming a gameplay limiter into a gameplay expander. Wall jump is very spammable, and you can use it to gain an infinite amount of height. Wall jump works really well with your other abilities, effectively allowing you to chain a lot of complex movements together. Wall jump is also a very forgiving ability, since it doesn't require you to use multiple walls to reset your jumps. You can also use it to maintain your height over a hazard, or you can save yourself from a mistake with a well-placed hop. Ori's level design is very vertical at times, and it is this way thanks in part to wall jump, and this helps to expand on the possible places for Ori to go within a relatively small distance. So to get wall jump, Ori has to move down into a pit that she can't really get out of on her own. So when she gets wall jump, we immediately see just how smart the designers were about tutorials. Because me telling you that something is a wall jump doesn't really explain what it is in full. There are a lot of different types of wall jumps in games. Of course, you jump off walls with a wall jump, but that doesn't really explain how many times you can jump before it needs to be reset, if you need to use multiple walls, if it has a cooldown, and if there are only certain types of walls that you can jump off of. Important things like that, but since you actually have to quickly spam the ability to get out of the pit, you can understand the nature of your power. And this is all done in-game without any fucking nebulous tutorial VR mission shit. And because it's laid out like a challenge to be cleared and for knowledge for you to gain, the developers can depend on you having an appropriate amount of knowledge to use your abilities in a particular way. So that way, the designers can really tailor their challenges around your particular skill set. And when you learn to do this properly, you can even find rewards like this energy cell. It rewards you for using your new skills. When you get wall jump, you start to realize that there's an element of damage boosting in some areas. Ori's a game with a lot of spikes everywhere, and these spikes are usually in positions to fuck with you, but occasionally they're meant to divert you from a more efficient path to your objective, like this area here. You see, you're supposed to push some lame-ass block over to have a safe jump over the spikes, but if you're willing to trade some life and get a little bit risky with it, you can trade some life for some speed, and you can start moving in some fast and unique ways. However, as we'll see by Sorrow Pass, and at random points in the game, spikes deal progressively higher damage, or just outright kill you without much warning, ruining this fun aspect to the routing. Anyway, blah blah blah, something about a light festival, big tree. Really big tree. Tons of little Oris everywhere, awkward as fuck run cycle, big owl, steel sign, moving on. By the time you're used to Ori's wall jump, you find yourself in another pit, this time blocked by a wall with blue cracks in it, the type you've seen a couple of times before. We get an upgrade to Sign, Charge Flame. Charge Flame kicks off a series of abilities that all serve purposes for combat and for traversal. Charge Flame explodes, destroying objects obstructing your forward movement and dealing damage to enemies. It can even reflect projectiles, so it definitely has its uses to it. It also opens some secrets for you, and it can help speed up boss fights, but speaking honestly, it's a really cool tool that's held back by its resource. Charge Flame, just like Soul Link, uses energy. Energy is a really good system because it prevents you from spamming abilities, forcing a little bit of strategy. But it can also be a very overstressed resource. The problem here is simple. When you're given the choice between making a save state and dealing some damage to an enemy or opening a path to an optional upgrade, which one do you really want to choose? You see, a Soul Link is something that is clear, it's visible, it's tangible, and you know what it's going to yield. But using that same amount of energy on an attack that might not even instantly kill an enemy, and it doesn't guarantee a worthwhile return of investment when you find a secret, it's just not a fair trade to make. It's a really rough thing to incentivize without just breaking the system, but in the end I found it was just smarter to use Spark Flame instead of anything that used energy. I mean, sure, by my 13th some odd playthrough, I'm able to use more and more energy for Charge Flame instead of Soul Link, but that isn't really something that's going to happen on your first couple of playthroughs until you get a decent number of energy cell upgrades. And unfortunately, this discrepancy was not lost on the developers. Outside of the Spider Coves and one wall getting into Misty Woods, I cannot think of any place where you actually use Charge Flame to go forward. It's mostly optional shit. Incorporating this ability into your general platforming, especially in Ginso Tree and the Misty Woods, where you'd be having to juggle multiple actions over hazards, would be a perfect way to use this tool. But because of it's a finite system, they don't really use it in this way, which really sucks. While Ori and Sign try to get to the Ginso Tree, they arrive to an interesting sight. I'm not really sure what he is. Kinda looks like spaghetti and meatballs. Except you only got one meatball and like 4 noodles. He also has JoJo hair. I don't know. He steals the water vein and we have to get it back before we can get into the Ginso Tree. As we rush to catch up with him, we get tricked, and in doing so, we are sent into the first major area of Ori and the Blind Forest, Gumo's Hideout. Gumo's Hideout is heavily trapped and mechanical. The hazards in Gumo's Hideout are all very artificial in design. Layers of spikes jut out in unnatural ways, and there are all these jumps and traps that are specifically tailored to Gumo's unique physiology, which is a really nice touch, and outside of some uninvited guests, it really feels like an area of the game meant for Gumo himself. Also on the way down, they reveal another enemy type, the slugs. These guys are still proximity-dependent snipers, but instead of dodging them to kill them, you're trying to bait them and destroying the world around you. And there are many scripted events throughout this area that constantly reveal new traps from Gumo. Unfortunately, depending on when you place your soul link, you can have to re-watch some unskippable cutscenes with every new attempt. You really start to notice it with these lasers. I mean, they kind of erase Ori from the game if you so much as, like, pinky toe graze them. And having to re-watch this Melvin run away with my orb gets a little old after a while. Overall, Gumo's Hideout's a very enjoyable place to be, and it has some pretty cool and perilous jumps to make good use of your abilities up until this point. Right, so after some time with both Charge Flame and Wall Jump, we hit another ability that's standard to a lot of platformers now, Double Jump. Double Jump works just as advertised. It's a secondary jump that can be used after a regular jump. Revolutionary. I know. But even still, it's woven into your gameplay very nicely after this point. You're required to use it at various different areas in your jump to get the appropriate distance for some gaps, giving you a nice variation to your play. Getting abilities in Ori is always an excitement, which is a really good thing, an accomplishment that some games just do not manage. In the Metroidvania genre, a type of game that centers around getting stronger through power-ups and exploration, it's really important that your player has this awesome feeling even when they just lay eyes on an upgrade, and Ori definitely manages that. The sound and animation is really good here. It instantly conveys the knowledge and power being passed down to Ori from the ancestral tree. Shit's really hype, man, and with each new power you get, the core interaction of your challenges ahead can expand, and you can return to old environments with new eyes, searching for possible hiding locations for upgrades and experience cells. Ori is divided into 6 major themed locations. You have Gumo's Hideout, Ginso Tree, Misty Woods, the Forlorn Ruins, Sorrow Pass, and Mount Horu. Obviously, there's an entire hub world that sort of connects these locations in between, but these are the most thematically significant. Each area has its own level design gimmick, with an optional mechanical gimmick on top of it to highlight the level design. Gumo's Hideout is pretty much a straightforward death trap. The Ginso Tree is largely vertical, with teleporters as a mechanical gimmick. Misty Woods has morphing environments, the Forlorn Ruins has gravity shifting, Sorrow Pass has fucking spikes everywhere, and Mount Horu is a volcanic series of challenge chambers. All of these areas have some type of plot-relevant device within them that are either important for you to obtain or restore. It's not a difficult-to-follow system, which is pretty good since it doesn't really need to be. We finally complete the maze of Gumo's Hideout, and in so doing, help our homie kick a smack habit. We finally return the water vein and we get access to the first major dungeon of Ori, the Ginso Tree. The Ginso Tree, as we'll see with the other major dungeons in Ori, are like condensed challenge runs for the skills that you have up until this point. The Ginso Tree is largely reliant on these teleporters to move Ori from place to place very quickly. It's a bit of a shame that these portals are not used after this dungeon, but I think I might be okay with that. For one, the novelty of them would sort of be diminished if they just appeared everywhere, but besides that, they're very disorienting to work with. The little particle effect that indicates what 2 portals you're using are a little tough to see when you just have particle effects everywhere normally. But even beyond that, the entryways into the portals are much larger than Ori herself, and they cover her very quickly, sort of confusing you as to where she is exactly as she exits the other side. Also, there's shit like this. I think this happens purely because the spikes on the wall clip into the portal entrance. Beyond that though, there are some really cool secrets hidden in various areas of the tree, encouraging you to explore around a bit, and it's a fun place to be for the most part. After we move further up the tree, we find one of the most legendary abilities that I think I've played with in a video game. Bash. Bash is so fucking cool, dude. Where to even start with this? Bash is the exact opposite of Charge Flame, in that it's a combat mobility tool that is actually used throughout the rest of the game. Bash changes everything about the game, and it does so by giving you an open system to use and be expressive with. Bash works very simply. You target either an enemy, a lamp, or a projectile. Ori uses this to propel himself in one direction, while the target shoots off in the other. You can go in any direction, and there's no cooldown out of Bash, so there's some pretty tricky stuff you can do if you want to. Once again, the level design is perfect to teach you exactly how it works, and how you can use it with a lamp, an enemy, and a projectile. And each communicate what you're capable of, and with that skill, you can do something like this.
That was so sick. That was so fucking sick. Oh my god. That was so dope. Oh my god. Oh, that was so fucking dope. Oh my god.
Now, if I could point to the moment that I knew that this game was the one, it was this moment right here. After like half an hour or more of attempts, it finally worked. I was able to manipulate the fireball into the barrier without having to use any portals except the last one. This is exactly how I do this challenge room now. In my several playthroughs of Ori, I have never used any more portals than the last one. I've never had to use the intended route here, and I never do. The open design that this puzzle is based around enables the player to use a variety of different approaches to this problem. Since Bash is such a user-friendly skill, they can really start putting you in some rough situations, and they can trust you to get out of it with your skill. Bash also changes the way that you deal with enemies. Instead of standing around waiting for Sign to do her fucking job, you can just grab an enemy and go. Grab an enemy and go. Now that you have cleansed the Ginso tree and set the elements of water free, you have to get out of the tree as quickly as possible. These are the escape sequences, and they're quite a loaded topic for me, but I'll get to them around the time we reach the Forlorn Ruins. But in the meantime, let's talk about the soundtrack for a minute, because that's one of the highlights of this section. From the moment you boot up the game, Ori's OST has been there in the background to bring an element of hype and mysticism to your whole journey. Whether you're spending time with your recently dead mother, getting bodied by a giant owl, or just exploring around the world, there will be an appropriate score underneath your every action. It varies between instrumentals driven by woodwinds, drums, and brass, or Aurelie Brighton's voice. It's easy to say that a game has a good soundtrack, but it's a very different thing to say that a game's OST sells the feeling or emotion. It's really tough to get that sound that fits with what's happening on your screen, but after spending some time with it, anytime you hear that melody, that playful staccato, or that tense crescendo, it all invokes images in play within the Blind Forest, and that's an accomplishment in itself. At times, Gareth Coker, the composer, would have no reservations about going in with the full range of his symphony orchestra, like he does during this escape sequence. But at other times, there's a lot of respect to be given to the man for knowing when a simple hum will communicate the emotion. After finally cleansing the water, we are introduced to one of the commerce sections in Ori, swimming around, collecting keys. The swimming within Ori controls really well, and the breath gauge keeps you on the move, pushing you to explore further to find more air. I mean, since you can bash underwater, it's basically perfect, but I think it's worth noting how much of a glacier effect this has on your level design. You know all those documentaries where they show the glaciers like flipping over due to climate change and you're like, wow, it's a lot of stuff under there. Well, that's basically what this does. There's a lot more verticality underneath the surface for you to explore. It's just sort of a shame that you don't see more bodies of water to explore, since it could be like a whole new world under the sea equivalent to the one above. The whole clean water segment is very calming, especially after that intense-ass escape sequence, thanks to its bright colors, warm lighting, and comfy soundtrack. It really just highlights that Ori on the whole is very well paced. The difficulty and environment shifts often, keeping things fresh, and the moments of intense hype, like the escapes, don't appear often. Each new environment also comes with a series of progressions from low intensity to high intensity, in both spectacle and execution. The game is constantly pushing forward. You're never really lost on where to go next, which is good, since it keeps the flow of the story going, and a lot of that is thanks to the map. The map does a great job of keeping you on the right path without necessarily telling you exactly where to go. You see, Metroidvania sort of glows and shines with exploration, and that can be spoiled by having the entire game's world spelled out for you. But Ori carefully uses the map to give you a general direction to advance without explicit direction. Ori's world is very vertical, meaning that it could potentially be easy for you to get lost without some sort of direction. The map will also be filled in if you use either map stones or just explore on your own. Thanks to this, you can know where to go to advance the story, so you can choose to go the opposite direction to work your way around instead. The world of Ori and the Blind Forest is a very lively and natural one. This makes it perfect to go exploring around because there are all sorts of natural hiding locations to find stuff in, and every time you find something new, it always looks cool. And there are a lot of optional areas through these breakable barriers and energy gates that lead you off the beaten path to go on a bit of an adventure. Unfortunately, none of them really take you to an optional dungeon or lead to an optional upgrade, but I can see why they decided against stuff like that. Having to design a bunch of optional content has really become less and less worth it as time goes on. But I have to give credit regardless for every time I enter a new area, and it feels different from what I was expecting. When we get Kuro's Feather, the game design can change even further by extending the horizontal gaps in the levels. Combine this with bash, double jump, and wall jump, and we can start using a lot of different actions in rapid succession to work our way through the Misty Woods. Like I was saying earlier, the Misty Woods has a level design gimmick of a shifting world around your character. Whether it's the level design, changing shape behind you, or the flower petal platforms that appear and disappear, the Misty Woods are going to keep things consistently fresh visually, and they keep you guessing. The Misty Woods is a very strange part of the world, almost psychedelic in the way that parts of the levels will morph and change. Many of the jumps are over spiked pits, encouraging you to use the floating platforms. Also, yeah, that right there sort of leads me perfectly into the ability tree. The ability tree may seem harmless, but that also comes at the cost of some of your challenge, depending on your specialization. The ability tree is divided into 3 core trees, each with their own focus on either combat, exploration, or utility. I guess what really bothers me about the system is how it is not a major impacting factor on your gameplay outside of stats usually. Remember what I was saying earlier about the combat feeling limp and underwhelming? Well, that's largely mitigated by going up the combat tree. I mean, you're still just mashing square, but your mashing works just a little bit better. Let's see, focusing on one tree at a time, picking random, combat. The combat tree is entirely based around stats bonuses that don't really change the way you engage enemies in any meaningful way. Instead of giving you newer skills to use to put a twist on your combat, it just increases the damage and fire rate of your Spirit Flame. Nowhere in here is anything comparable to regroup, rekindle, or triple jump. Nothing here makes you approach the overall combat in different ways. I mean, sure, your Spirit Flame can hit multiple targets with one upgrade, but you're rarely getting swarmed in any way to utilize that bonus. I think what upsets me the most is that it seems that this tree exists for its own sake. If the Spirit Flame was not balls to use without these upgrades, then there would be no reason to invest in this tree, so the fun of your combat is being sacrificed if you go into the exploration or utility tree. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I can't help but wonder how much more enjoyable the game would have been if these upgrades to Spirit Flame would have just happened naturally as you progress through the game. Alright, so the exploration tree is a little weird. The exploration tree, like, it has this end game, right? The last 3 skills on the tree just highlight more stuff on the map. That's what this whole tree is about, really. It highlights the secrets on your map and it lets you see through walls. Everything else just makes your health and energy pickups do more. It kind of takes the wind out of your sails when a tree focuses so heavily on a single non-interactive aspect of the game like the map. Arguably, the combat and utility trees are useful on repeat playthroughs, but the exploration tree's usefulness can practically be ignored entirely by going into it once and taking screenshots of the maps and using those on repeat playthroughs. I think it's a little weird that you can basically just remove this entire tree by going to game facts. I mean, that's a bit of a problem that a lot of game designers are having to balance around these days, the difference between online guides and things that you find naturally. And it's not always a fair thing to balance around, but it is something to consider. Now, the utility tree is easily my favorite of the 3. It still has stuff like Charge Flame and Soul Link cost reductions, needless upgrades that could have just been made standard anyway, but the real heroes of this tree are Rekindle, Regroup, and Triple Jump. Rekindle switches up the way that you place Soul Links, because instead of thinking of them as one-off placements, you can instead plan around using the same placements multiple times for efficiency's sake. Regroup also retools your Soul Link into healing you a little bit, encouraging you to use Soul Links more often to make even riskier decisions, which works perfectly for Soul Link. Triple Jump is a really good skill that probably should have been made a mandatory upgrade. Combining the height gain of Wall Jump with the distance extension of the Feather, with the boost of speed and direction with Bash, on top of having 3 additional jumps. That just sounds awesome and fun. Like, why would you even have a floor in that case? Unfortunately, the designers have to just assume that you have nothing but the double jump for the entire game. So if you actually have triple jump, you can just sort of abuse it through some puzzles like you can here. Also, take a good look at this, my children. We're going to be seeing a lot more of it as we enter the Forlorn Ruins. Alright. So, upfront admission, I hate everything about the Forlorn Ruins segment. Everything from the dungeon itself, to the escape sequence, to the stealth section, which we will get to in a little bit. You know, normally snow levels are some of my favorite in games, and with Ori's art style, it looks really good. But the actual mechanics and design of this dungeon is really frustrating for me, and I did not have a whole lot of fun at all the first time that I was going through it. As far as the dungeon itself goes, it all centers around this. This orb is the mechanical gimmick of the Forlorn Ruins, and it also informs the level design too. The Forlorn Ruins is the home of the Gumon, the same race as our boy Gumo. At least, it was, before they all froze to death. So the dungeon is entirely based around these long leaps and big vertical climbs that are meant for the Gumon physiology, and like Gumo's hideout, it's mostly mechanical and manufactured in nature, with various parts of architecture being heated by the energy of the machinery. Except now, because of the decaying forest, it's mostly frozen over, and in this world, being frozen over means there's fucking spikes everywhere. Even though this concept would have theoretically been really cool, and a perfect test for all of your skills and abilities accrued up until now. I mean, when you open up the pause menu, you have almost all of your abilities except for one by the time you enter this dungeon, and you're probably going to have at least one of your trees almost fully maxed out. So now would be a really good time to use all those skills in the design to give you a really challenging experience. But instead of doing any of that, they just remove most, if not all, of your mobility options, completely wasting what was a really good piece of potential. Right, so since the walls and ramps are hot as balls, if you touch them, you run the risk of turning into air. So to defend yourself, you have to carry this little orb around, and it protects you from the heat. But it does more than that. It also changes your gravitational alignment. This is actually a really cool idea, and it has the potential to change the way that you approach some situations. I mean, how would your abilities like Bash, or Stomp, or even Kuro's Feather react when the floor is relative? But instead, they just have you carrying this heavy fuck-off orb and scaling up walls with a reduced movement speed and an awkward jump arc. And of course, the walls have shit tons of spikes on them, and it's very tough to recover from a failure. That is, of course, if you're still alive after a failure, because some areas have instant kill laser beams. It's not exactly what I'd call fun on its own, and then they just throw in enemies on walls for some reason. I usually do my best to just skip as much of this area as possible, using the orb as rarely as I can, but that's clearly not the way it was intended to be done, so yeah, not fun at all. I mean, I guess the counter-argument here is that it subverts your expectations, and I mean, it does. I was expecting a fun mechanic that actually exploited all the sick-ass moves that the game gave me. And logically, if you were going to restrict Ori so severely, why not put this dungeon before the Ginso tree? Or even earlier on than that, when the player doesn't have too many skills to miss when they're taken away. It also doesn't help that the heavy commitment nature of the orb's jump arcs means that you need to have a lot of confidence in where you're going before you get there. This would be fine if the camera angle wasn't also strangely zoomed in, I guess? I don't know. It's really difficult to see exactly where I'm going to be going before I'm already there, and when you combine this with the clunkier control, it really makes for an unfun experience. This is a gimmick that could have been cool if it didn't overstay its welcome, but with the reduced movement speed and the likelihood of failure on your first couple of attempts, it means that you'll be walking up walls in super slow motion for a lot longer than you should be, and the longer that takes, the less fun that you can have, and it just comes down to a lot of strange decisions to be making when the consequences of failure just mean more of your time is wasted. It spins against the way that it would drive best, is my point. Thanks to Gumo, we now have to go through the second of 3 escape sequences to get out of the Forlorn Ruins and continue our quest. So, yeah. The Forlorn Ruins escape can blow me. I have very little positive to say about this from a design or play perspective, although the same can be said of the other 2 escape sequences, but focusing purely on the Forlorn Ruins, it starts with this gush of wind pushing you upward. A button prompt appears on screen telling you to use Kuro's Feather to go up, and already we have a serious problem. Ori lacks any real boss fights. Boss fights are typically used as tests for the skills that you've been building up in your adventure, so the escape sequences are the supplements for those tests, and in theory, I'd call it a stroke of genius to challenge a platforming character with a high-speed platforming section. That is what I would say if these were good challenges of your skill, or fun for that matter. So if you were to challenge a player on their skill with the feather, why not actually use the feather for the preceding dungeon? Or hell, just use the wind currents that push you upward in the level more than not at all. With the Ginso Tree escape, you've at least used the skills of double jump, wall jump, and bash at several points before you get tested on those skills. With the feather escape, this is the first time that you use the feather to gain height, and you have to get used to the cadence of your height gain while you're being tested on that same knowledge. Do you see how we have a little conflict of interest here? Maybe if the first corridor of the escape lets you get used to it. Maybe. But no, you're immediately having to deal with falling spikes and wind currents that get annoying and they can fuck your shit up pretty quickly. This also isn't an issue of get good, because what the hell were you supposed to go into this with? What prior knowledge about the Kuro's feather was going to make this sequence any more skill intensive? Oh yeah, there are also these falling spike rocks that kill you instantly, and they don't actually start falling until you get really close to them and just, god, fuck you. These are not adequate tests of my skill. These test my willingness to try and fail until I finally succeed at these asinine gauntlets. These are also some of the only times when your ability to use Soul Link is restricted. So if you fail, and it's highly likely that you will, due to the very nature of their design, it's all the way back to the beginning to redo everything you've already succeeded at just to get back to where it actually beat you. These sequences are incredibly restrictive, which runs counter to the more open level design of the rest of the game. These escape sequences really aren't that bad if you can ace them in a couple of tries, but the longer you spend having to redo them, the more it's going to get on your nerves. The escape sequences have something unique to them that the rest of the game really doesn't have. A constantly moving failure state to move you forward. Whether it's the water, the spikes in the air, or Kuro and the fire, you need to keep moving, and failure of any small or large degree can just send you back to the start. They're almost like Rayman Legends invasion levels. They're incredibly condensed, they're fast, they're precise, and they're knowledge intensive. If you do them right the first time, then they're pretty awesome and engaging. But in both cases, it's difficult to play and react to the challenges naturally, requiring a degree of memorization and grinding to do them properly. The primary difference between the escapes and invasions, though, is that while the invasions are optional to collect more teensies, the escapes are mandatory. And placing these segments that require a lot of grinding just ruins your pace. It stops all hype, and it puts the player on tilt. After we get out of the Forlorn Ruins escape sequence, you'd think it would be over, but after a brief encounter with Kuro, we have to go into a stealth sequence. So the point of this is to obviously escape from Kuro, who is over there, by continually breaking line of sight with her over here, on a linear plane. While you're running in a straight line, why the fuck is she just sitting there? This may be a little nitpicky, but if this section couldn't have been good from a gameplay perspective, it could have at least been a good plot point. But all this really does is just call Kuro's intelligence into question. I mean, instead of just sitting there waiting for me to pop out of the water again, she could have just swooped down over to where I dived and camped me. And boom. Plot over. But instead you just go through this incredibly linear series of mini puzzles that don't play well with your creativity or your ability to learn and experiment, and most of that is thanks to the fact that Kuro kills you if you're exposed for 3 seconds. No lie, if you maintain line of sight for 3 seconds, you are instantly killed. Counting the establishment of line of sight, her flying over to you, and her wrecking your shit. 3 back-to-back-to-back sequences of incredibly restrictive and derivative gameplay that doesn't mesh well with the best parts of Ori, whilst ignoring the basics of fair play, reasonable challenge, and just not wasting my fucking time. Just condense this entire segment of the game into the least enjoyable part of Ori. For a solid hour going through the dungeon, the escape, and the stealth section, this was the opposite of what I found enjoyable in Ori. Looking back on it though, if nothing else, this whole segment of the game just made me realize how fun and enjoyable the game is when you're just running around. I really do have to give mad props to the level design of the overworld. Connecting all of these areas is a big series of overworld areas that really allows you to have fun with it. It's a very natural thing, and there are a lot of little obstacles along the way that Whether there's small jumps, height gaps, or random enemy placements for you to bash through, it really develops a flow to it that fits well with the natural visuals and control scheme. The whole game flow in these parts is so natural and fun that a lot of it is thanks to how simple and responsive the controls and animations are. The character control in Ori is simply amazing. It's rare that I really feel like my character is truly in my control, but Ori definitely is, and every platforming action feels very good to do. The animation for Ori and the Blind Forest looks amazing throughout. It's filled with these little touches that bring the whole world to life, and this extends to the character animation. Judging by his stature alone, Ori is a small creature, wispy almost. His arms flap in the wind when he runs, and all of his jumping animations make him seem light like a feather. This is a really good way to convey that your character's agility is what makes them physically distinguished, but Ori's presence extends beyond his physical movements. Through the ancestral tree and sign, Ori gains mystical powers, and it's here that the floral animation just goes wild. With each use of bash, there's a great feeling of tension and release, displaying Ori's target shooting off in one direction, while Ori maintains grace and fluidity. Charge Flame is accompanied by a huge explosion that shakes the environment. Same with Stomp and Charge Jump. All of these abilities emphasize that Ori's powerful not necessarily in body, but in spirit. Now that we have the element of winds restored, we can finally move up to Sorrow Pass. The last key we need rests at the top of the world, and to get there we have to proceed through this maze of sharp spikes and aggressive enemies. Sorrow Pass plays with your ability to be precise with Kuro's Feather, like the previous escape sequence, but nowhere near as bad. You gotta be careful here because if you fuck around too much, you get impaled on the spikes above, below, and every fucking where. It can be a little easy to get lost in these early areas because of the fact that shit is all the same wall of spikes for a while, but pretty quickly it diverts into these little offshoot paths. I like the natural progression of expectations as the game goes on, up until the point where it eventually just removes your ability to touch the ground, forcing you to chain your abilities together to stay in the air. It's a really neat progression from the start of the game. You really would not have been able to survive here if you came here at the start of Ori. Also, just in case you haven't figured it out yet, virtually every frame of this game could be a wallpaper or a mural. It's very pretty. At the top of Sorrow Pass, we get the final key to the final area. Appropriately, we leave Sorrow Pass with all of our abilities unlocked, and we'll definitely have one of our trees fully maxed out at this point. We are ready for Mount Horu. So, Mount Horu is just the best. Hands down, this is my favorite dungeon of the three. The gimmick of Mount Horu is simple. There is no gimmick to Mount Horu. It's purely a level design kink. Instead of working your way up through the mountain, you have to work your way up and then down through a series of individual challenge rooms to reveal the heart of the mountain. This is a perfect assortment of final challenges for your last dungeon. Nearly every skill you've acquired is put to the test here, whether it's high-speed platforming, careful side-swapping to avoid deadly lasers, bash puzzles, or this. Everything is put to the test. This one is my personal favorite, because clearly you're intended to bash your way up to the top, then start reflecting projectiles and working your way down. But if you're crazy enough, you can start killing them at the beginning of the challenge and working your way up, while reflecting their projectiles back at them. It's incredibly fun to do. This dungeon retains and exploits the control and expressive problem solving that just is why Ori is so great. The entirety of Mount Horu is burning. It's dangerous to even stand around at certain parts, so you have to be incredibly active and reactive to your environment. And the level design is so condensed and enemy encounters are so frequent that enemy bashing is just how you get around the place. The whole dungeon makes such a strong use of the mechanics in a fast-paced and fun way, it's the perfect way to close out this game. My only complaint about Mount Horu is that this approach to the design does not appear at an earlier point. All of your platforming is put through a rigorous series of challenges of both precision and grace, and each individual challenge room comes with a unique series of obstacles to overcome. This dungeon succeeds in challenging you where the escape sequences failed, and it does so while feeling fair and final without losing that sense of hype and adventure. So, yeah, they went ahead and did it. I was not lying. They combined the stealth section with the escape sequences. I mean, this is much less peanut butter and jelly and much more cyanide and asbestos. Alright, I'm not going to dwell on this one in particular, but this just is not fun or enjoyable. None of the escape sequences really have been. They've been trial and error as balls, and they don't mesh with what I find fun about Ori. I mean, sure, I can clear every single one of these challenges on my first try. Not because I'm some god at Ori, but just because I've ground it out so much that I've just memorized what to do. And that's just not all that fun. Ori's interaction ends as it begins. You're controlling Naru on her way to help her child. The day is saved. Kuro uses her better judgment to sacrifice herself for the sake of the forest, and that brings an end to the adventure of Ori in the Blind Forest. Whew. It's finally over. You know, I don't think I'll ever really get the opportunity to say that a game is perfect, but Ori came very close. Being honest, if it weren't for the Forlorn Ruins sequence, I would have virtually nothing to complain about. There are a couple of kinks here and there, but nothing substantial enough to really get upset about. But being real though, even the Forlorn Ruins would probably be a fine sequence if it were in a game that just wasn't as good as Ori is. All in all, it's got the looks, the sound, and most importantly, the gameplay of a truly wonderful game. And with a definitive edition on the way eventually, who knows, Ori and the Blind Forest could be my game of the year for 2 years in a row. My name has been Vash TSB, and I'll see you guys soon.